Mr. Todder, are you going to start with the motion for the board?
He was making notes on it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's one more time it is. It's been a long process, and we've certainly heard a lot of information, both from our staff and from the applicant and from the many speakers from the West End community. And I want to thank everyone for coming. This has been a long process. We've heard from this community many times on this proposal, and certainly on other proposals in the West End too. And we're going to be hearing from this community much more frequently in the coming months because we're just starting a community plan. And I'm pleased to say that I think the community plan will hopefully provide clarity around many of the issues that we're finding tend to come up in applications such as this. This application predates the launch of the community plan by several years. And it is our obligation, it is the obligation of this board and the obligation of me as the Director of Planning to consider it in the context of the policy structure that it came in. That is the way our system works, and we could pretend our system is different, and we could wish our laws were different, but they are not. And we are bound by the laws that we have, including a very limiting law, a frustrating law from the provincial government, which provides us very little latitude for the preservation of heritage buildings, something I and Mr. D'Agostini, our senior heritage planner, lament every day in our work, but it is the truth. And it is. And someone said in the context of the public presentations, get real. Well, that is the reality, the legal reality of the system that we work within. And I often wish we had more powers than we do, but we don't. And I'm sure everyone in the community wishes they had more power to do different things every day of your lives. But you are bound by the abilities and powers of your life as well. It is a great... This is not a debate, ma'am. And frankly, I don't appreciate the commentary about asking us to do something right when it is our obligation to consider what is right in this context, and we might have a different opinion than yours. I always appreciate the advisory board's commentary in this, but this is the first time I feel where some of the commentary has gone across the line, I have to say.
No. You're wrong.
We do not have an ability, ma'am. Madam Chair?
Could I ask that Mr. Todder's got the floor now, if I could ask that he have that floor. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have a legal ability to demand preservation. We can provide incentives, and we often do. It is a well-established and successful program across the city. And this is one of the first times, in my experience, that we brought a result after a lengthy negotiation with the community, with the applicants, to preserve the heritage feature that we had identified as a Heritage A building. And we had speaker after speaker from the community say that that was not supported. That the tool we had, density preservation tool of density in the area, was not supported by the community. Not everyone felt that, to be sure, and certainly we heard some passionate voices from the heritage community, but ultimately council certainly heard that the community didn't want to see additional density in return for heritage preservation of the site. A very, very disappointing result from our perspective, because we had indeed recommended its approval. We said to council at the time that a tower of 110 feet would meet the zoning guidelines for discretionary zoning, in our opinion, at that time. I think that was established in the report and verbally at council. It was even used as the basis for the heritage density calculations. We made the point to council at that time that an outright was possible and would be likely if the HRA was not approved. So council was aware of that when they considered the application. Ultimately, they did refer it back to staff. But even as they were doing that, they made many comments agreeing with the community that the kind of densities that were necessary in order to preserve the heritage building were not supported by the community and very likely not supported by that council. And we were listening very carefully. So the applicant did what I think was always in their purview, but we were hoping they wouldn't do, which was work on something that didn't preserve the heritage building. The upside is we do preserve the tree, and that is an important achievement. The use of our discretion to allow a different kind of a building form that's taller is a key to preserving the tree. And I do want to thank and commend the applicant for doing that. I'm very concerned that the tree be preserved. I do not want our discretion used to create this form in large part to preserve the tree and not have the tree remain for all of our lifetimes and hopefully much more. So I'm going to suggest some wording for a stronger condition to make that happen. But I want to make that very, very clear to the applicant and for the minutes, Madam Secretary, that my conclusion that the intent of the zoning guidelines is met is in large part due to the fact that this form preserves the tree, which is both a heritage feature and a landscape feature, both of which were contemplated in the guidelines, both of which we have strong interest in achieving. The West End is a mixed scale building, or community. A lot of the commentary I've heard tonight, both from the advisory members and from the community, seems to suggest that this is a low scale building, that a tall building is simply inappropriate. I do not agree with that. This is not a tall building only community. It's certainly not like downtown South. Thus we have guidelines for greater tower separation, and the intention is to limit the amount of tall buildings compared to some of our other denser parts of the downtown peninsula. But this is not a low-rise, and this is not a mid-rise community. This is a mixed-scale community that has had high-rises for many years. Many of the opposition to this proposal live in high-rises.
And they were supposed to have spaces on either side.
So I don't agree with the sort of perception that a high-rise is for some reason inappropriate in this community. This community has many high-rises, and it will probably have more. But it will be
Second
done.
highest density in Canada.
Excuse me.
That is actually not a fact.
Now, you can use the word.
The actual statement that it's the second highest density in Canada is actually not factually accurate, but it's commonly referred to, and something will be clarified through the community.
Your high-rise lobbying last
Excuse
year
me,
told
sir.
us where you stand.
Actually, the tone of this commentary, I hope, is not something that is continued through the community plan process, because I listened very carefully to everything that was said by you.
And then ignore
So I'm
it.
disappointed in this
And now
commentary.
you're ignoring it.
You can see why everyone's so upset.
Excuse me.
I'm
You'll
sorry,
have an
people are upset. The people
Yeah.
is upset.
I know
That's
you're
me.
upset, but right now Mr. Tottering has the floor, and I'd like him
Yeah.
to be able to finish up his
What's
comments.
the good of
Thank
this?
you.
Thank you.
What's good, he doesn't heard a thing we've said.
I'd note that there is still a pending HRA. The applicant still has the ability to proceed in that. And some of the commentary we've heard from both the public and the advisory board members suggests that we should send this back to council. The council doesn't approve development permits. That is our responsibility, and it's not the tendency of this board to shirk its responsibility. So I do believe we have to consider the development permit that's before us. But I do intend to suggest a motion that perhaps keeps the opportunity allowed for council consideration of the original HRA. But before I do that, Madam Chair, I'm going to suggest, as I noted, a couple of amendments to the language in the conditions. First of all, I'm going to suggest an additional condition 1.4 on page 2. That additional arrangements be made to preserve and protect the tulip tree to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning and the Director of Legal Services. And to be truthful, I'm not sure what those further conditions will need to be. It strikes me that given we've designed around the tree now, the actual designation of the tree wouldn't necessarily kick in a compensation situation. I think one of the things I sought to learn in my questions to Mr. Heaney is whether there would be an economic hardship to preserving the tree, and thus a need for compensation. So it occurs to me maybe we can still keep designation on the table now that we've designed around the tree with this smaller scale. So I would like to continue those kinds of conversations. Maybe it's not designation, maybe it's an agreement. But I don't think I'm satisfied that a simple letter from the owner is going to be sufficient at this point, Mr. Heaney, given that we know that the ownership is going to transfer very quickly to the strata council, to the strata itself that will own the tree. So I'd suggest, Madam Chair, that addition. At the end of condition 1.2, which speaks to design development of the front yard landscaping, I'm going to suggest the addition of some additional wording to the note to the applicant. And it would read as follows: consideration of approaches that would improve the publicness of the green space around the tree will be undertaken, or should be undertaken. That's how it should be undertaken, since it's a consideration item. Mr. Heaney will recall, in the context of the HRA, I had some interest in making sure that the both visible and physical accessibility of the space around the tree be maximized. I'm not sure if maximize is the right word, but I certainly felt it could go further than the HRA. I've noticed in this context it's almost more like a wall-like condition, so I'd like to have some further consideration around that. I don't think we have to make it fully public, and indeed under a development permit I don't think we have the ability to require that of you, but I think the design could be better.
Mr. Todder, just one question on that. That was part of the note?
Yes, at the end of the note to the applicant under condition 1.2.
And could you just repeat it one more time?
Sure. Consideration of additional approaches that would improve the publicness, and you could put that in quotes, of the green space around the tree should be undertaken. And I'll provide the board secretary with all of this wording later.
Yeah, I think you're right.
The last motion, or the last suggestion I'll make, wouldn't be, Madam Chair, and this is a bit unusual, it wouldn't be an additional condition. For lack of a better term, I'm suggesting it as a motion arising from the board. The board, as to my recollection, occasionally provides some commentary in the form of a motion that is outside of the purview of the application that's before us. And this is the language I'm suggesting based on what I've heard from the public and the advisory board members. Should the applicant still wish to consider the HRA, which is still pending, it is the board's recommendation to council that the HRA application and preservation of the Legg Residence, bracket, a Heritage A structure, end bracket, is strongly preferred to the proposal the board has approved. How I see this is it would be meeting the obligation of the board to do its job and consider under the guidelines and the zoning that we have in place the application that we have before us. But I do note that the HRA is still pending, and if the applicant wished to, they could still proceed with the HRA as an alternative to what the board is considering. I think the important things for the community to understand in that context is the tree would not be preserved in that context. The tree preservation was not part of the HRA. And this is not a situation where we have the ability on site to do everything. So it would be preserving the house at the expense of the tree, but that has always been staff's position, that if we could save only one, the house was more important. I think the community also has to recognize that that would come with additional density. Under our system, the only way we can mandate the preservation of the heritage building is through additional density. And so I would suspect that the applicant would want to hear from the community that that is a preferred scenario. But what we've had up till now is a back and forth that says we want the house preserved, but as soon as it proposes density, well, we don't propose or support the density. And we've literally had that kind of a back and forth over several iterations up till now. I think the community will have a choice. Do they support additional density in the tower in order to achieve the heritage building, or do they support the tower as it stands now? That would, To be clear, be fully in the purview of the applicant to decide whether or not they wish to proceed with the HRA, which is the truth now, that it is within their purview. But it does give the opportunity for the idea of preserving the heritage building to possibly still stay alive. And to be clear, from my perspective and the perspective of my department, that is a preferred scenario. Lastly, I'll say, and this has really been overshadowed in the context of the many things that have been said in this hearing, but I do believe the architecture is a beautiful piece of architecture. One of the best tower designs I've seen in my 5 years here. And it's a shame that, I hope that doesn't get lost in the context of all the very important and passionate issues that have been raised in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Totter. Who would like to go next? Mr. Judd.
I'll second the motion and the amendments made by Mr. Totter, and I really appreciate adding the motion around preserving the house, if that turns out to be possible. I think it's tragic that we're possibly in a situation of losing that house built in 1891, which is something hard to come by in Vancouver. And for all the reasons that Mr. Totter mentioned, it's not because staff don't appreciate heritage. I think the tragedy here too is there was an option on the table that would have preserved that house, and that for various reasons council found themselves not able to support. And that does put us in a box, and we can't keep punting this back and forth because we don't want to deal with it. So I think what you've proposed, Mr. Totter, is a reasonable compromise under the circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank the residents in the neighborhood and other residents in the city for their feedback tonight. And clearly this has been a long journey with a lot of frustration. So I really appreciate your coming out and managing your frustration with, in some cases, humor, in other cases, some frustration, but really recognize that that's been a long journey for you, and want to thank you for coming out and for your hard work to fight for what you believe in for our community. That's what makes Vancouver such an amazing place. So thank you all for taking the time and energy. To the applicant or the representative of the applicant, this has clearly not been an easy journey for you either. I do want to agree with what a number of folks have said, that it is, despite the challenging circumstance, it's a great looking building, and a lot of really good design components went into it, and it will add a lot architecturally to the city. As Mr. Judd and Mr. Totter have mentioned, this is a really difficult situation with limited abilities, limited powers of the city, and clearly a challenging decision to be made. So I just want to recognize that that's not an easy situation. I want to thank our volunteer advisory board, all of you who spent a lot of time with us today and have over many, many, many meetings. You do this as volunteers, and I really want to thank each and every one of you. This is not an easy process to have to sit through, and not an easy decision to weigh in on. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for your passion and commitment to urban design, to good development in the community, and to the various issues that we're dealing with. All of your comments were very thoughtful, so I want to thank you all for that. And to the motion, I guess I want to firstly make a friendly amendment, if I may, to 1.3. And earlier this year in 2011, the city undertook a pilot to deconstruct several homes that were going to be demolished, and managed to preserve 93% of the material from going in the landfill, and created jobs in the community doing so. And so I'd like to suggest that if it does come to this, that the house does need to, some components of the house need to be demolished or removed, that we choose deconstruction over demolition. and can keep that material in the community for reuse, creative reuse, and can create some jobs in the process. So I'd like under 1.3, it's a friendly amendment to read provision of a plan to relocate, salvage, comma, deconstruct, or reuse. And in the note below, the third line that currently reads materials on the site, the offer of the residents for relocation. I'd like to after the comma add, or the deconstruction of the remaining components of the house. Is that a friendly amendment? You okay with it? Okay. Mr. Judd, you okay with it? Okay. So with that said, I will support the motion that has been proposed by Mr. Totter.
Madam Chair, I do support that as a friendly amendment, and maybe I'll ask for a return the favor. It's very unusual to ask for a friendly amendment to my own amendment, but I knew I got thrown off a little bit there in terms of my notes, so I apologize, but I actually did miss a condition that I wanted to add. So beg Mr. Johnson's and Mr. Judd's forgiveness and indulgence. I had forgotten that I did have some concerns with regard to the back and forth information we had about why the floor plate size didn't necessarily appear as different as one would expect. And although I understand the issue of the heritage house, how it relates to the map, and I support the balcony approach, which I actually find both important to the architecture and the sustainability of the building. The fact that the amenity space has gone up, notwithstanding that it isn't an unreasonable amount of amenity space, is something that has that gave me pause. So I'd like to suggest an additional 1.5, that further review be given to the effects of amenity space on the floor plate size. All I want is to be able to have further discussions on whether or not that amenity space and the resulting floor plate size can be further adjusted. So if that doesn't change your support for the initial motion, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I would like to summarize what has all just happened. The application has been approved with a number of amendments, and I'm just going to summarize them. To condition 1.2, at the end of the note, adding language to the effect to consider additional approaches that would improve the publicness of green space around the tree. To condition 1.3, add deconstruct after the word salvage as another option. And in the note, third line, or the deconstruction of the remaining components of the house. So to bring the notion of deconstruction. A new condition 1.4, that additional arrangements be made to preserve and protect the tree to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning and the Director of Legal Services. And a new condition 1.5, that further review be given to the effects of the amenity space on the floor space size. Floor plate size. In addition, is what Mr. Totterman called a motion arising. I don't know exactly where it fits in, but it's a strong statement, I think, that was reflected in the advisory panel comments, that the pending HRA is still a pending application, and the applicant can revert back to that application and renew it, and that actually that scheme is preferred, strongly preferred, I think was the language Mr. Totteran used, that was seconded by the other members of the board to the current scheme. And so I think that actually gives the applicant team some choices to make, and I guess I want to just summarize the proceedings tonight by saying it's been a difficult set of choices all around for the last 6 years. For the neighbors to be weighing, be constantly asked, well, do you want the tree or do you want the house or do you want the density? And unfortunately, the answer can't be we want it all. We don't want the density and we want the tree in the house. And I think by putting this option back to the applicant team, it's raising that set of choices right back again, so that it's not going to be, nothing magical is going to happen. It's not going to go away. I think it's been a lot of difficult choices by the applicant team, and again, I have to say I've been aware of this application for the many years that it's been in at the city, and I really believe that the applicant has struggled along with you at these various choices and tried to balance it. There's been a lot of work and rework at the table. If the application that we heard tonight does go through and the applicant doesn't choose to go back and pick up where the HRA left off with council, I think everybody agrees the loss of the Heritage House is just completely regrettable. I don't think anybody here would be happy about that. So I think we leave tonight with an approved, well, I know we leave tonight with an approved approach, but with an option on the table, and I think over the coming days and weeks, the developer will make their choice in going back potentially to relook at that HRA mill. And I guess just before we close, I want to applaud the staff team for a very thorough report and a lot of effort over these last 6 years put into this. Very, very good job. Thank you, and unless there's any other business, we are adjourned.